Well, it is just after 10:30, so I am going to get started. I want to welcome everybody to the Safety Connection this morning. So I'm excited to be here. We don't usually do these on a Monday mornings. I feel like this is a strong start to the week, but very excited to be talking about, workplace violence and harassment prevention. Unfortunately, we know that there's a lot going on for Ontario workers, and we're seeing increases in workplace violence and harassment. So we're going to talk about what that is, why that's happening, and how we can minimize our risk with some sort of takeaways. And I have tons of resources and tools as well, and happy to help support you with those in any way I can. So my name's Christy Cork. Like I mentioned at the beginning, I am a Canadian registered safety professional. I'm located in St. Thomas, Ontario. So I know some of you did share your kind of London area. So that's close to where I am. I specialize in healthy workplaces, which means I do a lot of work with psychological health and safety consulting, workplace violence and harassment, and impairment in the workplace. So those are the three areas that I really focus on. And I do see there are already some questions in the chat around sharing the presentation. That's a normal question that we get all of the time. This session is being recorded with the intention that it will be made available to everyone afterwards. So we do have to go through a process to make sure, that it meets AODA and all of that stuff, but then it will be available on our WSPS.ca website. In fact, if you're not aware, there are tons and tons of safety connections that maybe if you missed them, or you weren't able to jump in or you weren't aware of them, it's a great place to go and listen to some of these pre-recorded safety connections because there's some really fantastic topics. I see there are still a few people having some technical issues. Again, I just want to confirm, I think most of you are experiencing this okay and you can hear and see. I'll forward the slide one just so that we can make sure. Oh, I need to take control. Okay, I do see the thumbs up, so I'm going to keep chugging along here. I do apologize if you're having some issues. It's not fun, but I can't spend too much time trying to troubleshoot for everyone. So we're going to keep chugging along. All right. So the next slide is about collecting a little bit of demographic information. So the Ministry of Labour, Immigration Training and Skills Development, they do partially sort of subsidize the work that WSPS does. And they're curious around the types of organizations and businesses that are using the services and are interested in these safety connections. Now, it is anonymous in the sense that you do not need to share and it won't be used, what workplace. They're looking for size of organization and they're looking for sectors. So if you wouldn't mind, we do appreciate if you could scan that, the QR code there. The function number is listed. Again, it's optional. You don't have to do this. It is just helpful so that we know how to gear and focus our programs in the future. We can pop this back up at the end too if you don't want to do this right now. So with regards to this Microsoft Teams meeting, we are up to 40, we just had someone else join, 140 participants in the session this morning. So you can imagine if we didn't mute microphones and cameras, there'd be a lot going on. It would be very, very distracting. So we do keep the microphones muted for all participants and we keep cameras off. However, we do have the chat feature is still functioning and we have the react and sort of raise hand features are still functioning. So if you wanted, you can react in different ways, to let me know how things are going for you. And I always appreciate when people chime in the chat and use those react features so it doesn't feel like I'm just talking in cyberspace here. So thank you to everybody that has already participated in that way. A couple other things, we will be having a couple of poll questions, just quick, easy poll questions. They are completely anonymous, so you can participate in those if you want to, and gives me an idea of sort of what's going on with the participants related to a few of these questions. Again, we have the chat and we have the reactions. Now, a couple accessibility features. You can turn on closed captions, like live captions. So if you go to that more icon at the top, there's that black banner bar at the top of the screen, and it has those three dots. When you click on more, you can go down to language and speech and turn on live captions. So if that is helpful for you, absolutely use that feature. We also have the ability to go into full screen mode. So if you're finding that maybe some of the content or text on the slides is too small and you would like that to be bigger, or if you're joining from a laptop or kind of a small screen, you can turn on that full screen option, and things will appear quite a bit larger for you. You can always readjust that and send it back down, so that you can, you're able to participate in polls and things like that. So the goals of these safety connections, we love doing these. It is a way that we get to provide information at no charge to businesses across the province. It gives you an opportunity to sort of learn different ideas about health and safety in Ontario. Hopefully, maybe adjust or tweak some programs or controls that you have in place to be more effective, but really just virtually connect. It's an exchange of information and you get to attend it from your personal workspace, whether you're working from home or if you're in a work environment right now. So here we go. We're going to get started and get right into this. I'll share the agenda. So we're going to talk about the current state of workplace violence and harassment in Ontario. Then we're going to look at contributing factors. So again, spoiler alert, things are on the rise. We are seeing increased reports of violence and harassment. We are, seeing a lot of uncivil, disrespectful behaviors towards Ontario workplaces. So we're going to talk about how to effectively de-escalate. What are some tips and tricks, right, that we can focus on and, help share with our coworkers and colleagues? We're going to look at what is part of a comprehensive program for violence and harassment. Make sure that you're at a minimum meeting the requirements of the legislation in Ontario. And then we're going to focus a little bit on psychological safety. So this is like what I get really excited about is psychological health and safety, and how if we're careful and if we're really aware and tuned in to sort of some of those actions around how work is organized, how people are managed, and the connection between that and minimizing the risk of violence in the workplace. And then we'll have some time for some resources and some Q&A. I see some people are still struggling with sound and content. I'm sorry. I know that's not a good way to start your Monday morning. So again, at least it is being recorded. So I don't want anybody to feel like they're missing out and will never see or hear all of this. It will be available. And, towards the end of the presentation, I'm going to put a link in the chat with all of our other safety connections, because there is one that's actually quite similar to this that is posted in there. So you'd be able to at least get similar messaging. Okay. Oh, I feel like I already ruined this poll question. Maybe just let us know. Okay, so this is in your personal experience. So forget what I've already said. In your personal experience, do you think that workplace violence and harassment is on the rise? Are you seeing an increase in the type of work that you do, where you work, or even as a customer and you're seeing other people have disrespectful or uncivil behaviors towards staff? What is going on? All right. I see lots of people chiming in, so thank you for that. Okay. So yeah, we have 83% are saying yes. 7% are saying no, so that's not your experience. That's fine. And then some are unsure. All right. Okay. Thank you. Okay, perfect. Thanks for everybody that responded. So the data does suggest that we are seeing an increase. And there was a study that was done, like the Western University, University of Toronto, and the Canadian Labour Congress back in 2022. So not that long ago, like it is at least still pretty current. They did a survey of 5,000 respondents across Canada with all different types of sectors, years of experience, type of work, and over 70% of those respondents indicated that they had experienced at least one incident of workplace violence and harassment in the past 2 years. I want you to think about that for a second. In 2 years, 70% of respondents indicated that they had been on the receiving end of workplace violence and harassment. When I really think about this number and the prevalence. And yes, we could really get into it and say, well, do they know what violence and harassment really is? And do they know the definition? It doesn't matter. This is their perception, is that they had experienced at least one incident of workplace violence and harassment. A couple things come to mind when I see this information, and we could go off on some tangents around this, but one thing that really stands out to me, and actually some of you mentioned in the chat that you are in HR, and I'm sure many of you are, right, in an HR type role. Do you think that 70% of your workforce is reporting these incidents? Probably not, right? I feel like this is one of the most underreported types of health and safety risks that exist. And there's a lot of reasons why employees don't report every incident of workplace violence and harassment. But I think we do need to encourage reporting, because how do we sort of justify this as a huge safety risk if we don't have those reports coming in, if people are sort of accepting it as part of the job, or the process of reporting doesn't feel safe, they're worried about that it's career limiting, or that it's not private and confidential, or that it won't be investigated and nothing will be done anyway. So what's the point in reporting? So we need to sort of change some of those optics and get people to report. I do see things coming in the chat, and I just have to warn you, like, I can be really like not distracted. Keep the stuff coming in the chat, but I'm going to intentionally pivot to the chat every once in a while instead of constantly reading the questions, because then it gets really confusing for you as listeners, not knowing what I'm talking about. So I see them coming in, and please keep them coming in. If I miss anything as it comes in the chat, Emily will help me out, and at the end we'll go back and answer some of those question and answers, or I will provide an answer to any of the Q&As that we didn't get to in a follow-up email. So Emily, after this session, will send everybody, all participants that were registered for this session, an email with some resources, and if we did not get to some questions, I'll make sure I get some answers put in there as well. You get my contact information, all of those things. So stay tuned, that will come. You won't miss out, and you don't have to worry about taking pictures of slides and things like that. You will get a comprehensive follow-up email. So this study and some other studies also indicated, when it comes to workplace violence and harassment, that across the board there is sort of this increase in frequency and severity, that it's not, it's not subtle, it's continuous, continuing to happen. There's increased fear to report. I think we really do need to take a look at how we are asking our workers to report incidents of violence and harassment. And maybe it's different, right? Maybe you have different mechanisms, or you're requesting different ways of reporting, whether it's violence or harassment. But really think about, like, do we make it easy? How does that reporter know that we've received that concern, we are investigating it, they're going to be made aware of the outcomes or what happened in the investigation? So we really do need to be considerate of that, because I think, when I do consulting in this space and I bring up this idea that I think, people are underreporting harassment specifically in the workplace, the number one reason why employees don't report harassment is because they don't think it's going to matter. They don't think anything is going to change. They don't think there's going to be accountability, or that people will be held accountable for their inappropriate actions or behaviors. Or sometimes, and not all harassment is between colleagues, right? It can absolutely be external. And I know the focus of this session today is really on those external sources of violence and harassment towards staff. Those individuals that you support, your customers, your clients, your patients, again, depending on the sector that you're in. So it's very difficult, or it can be very difficult, to minimize or reduce that risk that those patients, those customers, are going to be uncivil and disrespectful towards staff. So then what it comes down to is some training, right? Having means to summon assistance, but we still need to know about these incidents so that we can put appropriate controls in place. So why are things escalating? Why are we seeing an increase in incidents? Well, where do we get started? The truth is, I mean, I read that one sort of cloud and see this increased levels of stress, and I believe that is a huge contributing factor. when we experience high levels of stress or we have multiple stressors, we're not always able to respond effectively. We often react. And right now, the truth is people are experiencing high levels of stress. It can be because of like geopolitical related issues, things happening with our neighbors to the south. It can be increased financial stress. People are very concerned whether they're going to be able to feed their families or put gas in their car. There are huge levels of financial stress for individuals right now as well. Maybe relationship stresses, maybe they're caring for ill child or parent. There's a lot of things that people are taking on, and those stress levels seem to be quite high. Some other issues that I put up here, I think there is sort of this me first society, and I don't want to blame COVID for everything, but there's something that's different about, everybody trying to fight for what they want or need or what is in their best interest without considering other people or who's on the receiving end of that abuse or disrespectful behaviors. So I think we have that. I think this polarization of issues, it's like so many issues right now, whether it was, during COVID around masking or vaccinations. Now it can be around, different conflicts around the world or political views. It's like we're unable to sort of sit on the fence and look at both sides and the merits maybe to either side of an argument. Instead, we feel very strongly about something one way or another. And then we try to get people on our side, and everybody that doesn't have the same views and opinions is wrong, and we don't like them, and we will fight and be disrespectful to try and prove our point. I think this polarization of issues is pretty significant right now. And we're going to talk a lot about sort of why we approach different things differently later on in the session. But the truth is, like, we kind of have to learn that we all grew up with different backgrounds, different beliefs, different ways of working. There are generational differences. And yes, we might not agree with people. And I run into this all the time where I have different views, different ideas on how things should be done or what's right and what's wrong. But the truth is, we're not in other people's shoes. I didn't grow up with the same background and the same influences and the same social circles or family groups. So it's very difficult for me to tell someone that what they think is wrong when that is their lived experience, and they could easily, seek to justify that. So again, it's really just about trying to not always fight to get other people on our side. I am a competitive person by nature. I played a lot of sports growing up, and I can remember my mom telling me when I was younger, she's like, Christy, you can be right or you can be happy. And I often sort of reflect back on that when I'm trying to like explain things, or when I feel like, there's some type of injustice that I'm fighting for. Like, why do I feel that my opinion is the only opinion and is the right opinion or way of doing things? Like, it doesn't have to be like that. I cannot like what someone's doing or how they're choosing, whether it's raising their kids or how they work or their approach to work or work ethic. But I don't always need to fight for that, right? And there are some things, some social issues I feel really, really strongly about. But we have to be able to do that in a respectful way that still values the opinions of others. So when individuals start to escalate, and we're going to go through sort of what this aggression escalation continuum looks like. But what I want to point out first is this is not just something that happens to other people, right? We all get upset. We all get agitated. We all continue sort of up this aggression escalation continuum. And what's really important to realize, especially, if we work closely with people or people that we live with, is we should be able to identify those early warning signs for others. Because when we're proactive and start to pick up on some agitated behavior, people becoming hostile, or those early warning signs, if we can intervene and give some time, energy, and attention to those individuals when they're exhibiting those early warning signs, it's going to be a lot more helpful and easier to de-escalate instead of ignoring it or waiting until there's sort of hostile, threatening behaviors. Then it's very difficult to de-escalate, right? They're seeing red, they're very upset, very agitated, maybe feeling ignored, unheard, unvalued. So there are definitely some things we want to focus on in those early warning signs. But think about what this looks like for yourself. How would someone know if you were what your early warning signs are, or if you're starting to become hostile? I'll go to the next slide because it kind of gives you an example. So we're going to go through each of these sort of stages on the aggression escalation continuum. And maybe before I even do that, like, I should be really clear. While there are 4 stages here, not everybody is going to be able to like identify and progress through these 4 stages. We all know people that go from like 0 to 100 in 2.5 seconds, right? Like, you did not have an opportunity to de-escalate at those early warning signs. They immediately sort of came in huffing, puffing, demanding, being rude, using offensive language. So I don't want to suggest that like it always works in this nice pattern and we, have this opportunity. That's not always the case. But when you have the opportunity to identify some of those early warning signs for an individual, so let's say a customer comes in and you're in a retail environment and you can see that they're crossing their arms, they're fidgeting, looking at their watch because they're having to wait while you're checking out other people or providing services to other people. You can tell that they're starting to get agitated, right? No, most people are not great about waiting. That in and of itself can kind of be a trigger for some. So if we intervene at this stage and say, oh my goodness, like, thank you so much for being patient. I know that took a little bit longer than anticipated, but I really I appreciate your understanding. We go and we talk to someone when we start to see these early warning signs. It can minimize the risk that they're going to continue to escalate, or ask them what they need or what's going on. So an appropriate staff response at this stage is really to listen. And listening is one of the primary de-escalation strategies for all of these stages. And it is one word, that word listen. It's so short and sounds so simple, but not everybody is a good listener. And it is a skill that we need to practice. And I think sometimes we hear, but we don't listen. So we've all heard of like active listening. But what that actually means in practice is that that person that is talking to you or engaged in that conversation feels like a priority. You put away distractions. You're making eye contact if that's comfortable for you. You are paraphrasing, or you're trying to understand. You're really listening to understand, not just hearing them. And a perfect example that I often think of is when my kids were younger. They would come home from school. Maybe I'd be in the kitchen, like getting dinner ready, things like that. And they'd come in and they'd be talk, 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 talk. And I'd keep doing what I'm doing, right? Because I got a million things to do. And they keep repeating themselves and getting frustrated because they don't perceive that I have listened to them, right? If I stopped and I got on their level and I acknowledged what they were saying and they felt heard, right? Then they would have, walked away and said their piece. It would have been fine. So hearing is being able to sort of reiterate what someone has said, right? You have heard. I could literally regurgitate back to my kids everything that they said, but because I didn't take the time or make them feel like I was listening to them, they didn't perceive it as such, right? They felt unimportant and like what they were saying was minimized. So again, there's other things around listening. So like, I think if you're a problem solver by nature, you've got to be careful with how you're listening. And I am married to a problem solver. My husband's a wonderful man. There are times when he puts problem solving hat on in front of listening. And whenever if I've had a bad day and I come home and I'm like, oh my gosh, Chris, like this happened and this person said this, or this happened at a customer site, whatever, he immediately will go into problem solving mode and be like, oh, you should have said this, you should have done that, or do you want me to do this? And actually tries to solve a problem for me. Instead, like, what I was really looking for was just validation. I just wanted to vent, and I wanted him to say something like, "Oh, that sounds awful. Like, hopefully tomorrow's better." Like, that's all I really needed. So now my husband and I have this, like, before some conversations, I say either support or solutions. Because if it's a support conversation, I need him to stop talking. I need him to know that, like, I'm just venting. I need to get something off of my chest, and he needs to validate my feelings. If it's a solutions conversation, maybe something's going on with the house or with the kids and we need to work through a problem, a scheduling issue, then it's a solutions conversation and we're going to go back and forth and figure out how we're going to solve it. But those are two distinct types of conversations and types of listening. So sometimes when you're de-escalating someone, it can be either. Sometimes people just need to vent. They are frustrated and they just need to get something off of their chest. And if they do that in kind of a respectful way and just want to be heard, fine. Right? Like if they're just expressing what displeases them and that they're not satisfied with something, okay, we can handle that. Right? That's a problem. If someone doesn't like their food at the restaurant, or you've got someone that felt like they were waiting too long in a waiting room to go and see, you know, someone that's with a settlement agency and their appointment's taking forever, and they just want to express, you know, like next time, like, you know, I've got a lot going on. This is putting me behind. Like this waiting is, you know, really frustrating. Then we can listen to that. That is not violence. That is not harassment. That is someone venting. And I know there's a fine line because we don't deserve to be treated with disrespect. But there are also times when maybe we have done something that displeases or was, you know, inconsiderate of a customer or a client or person you support of their experience. And it's okay to apologize. So maintain a safe distance. We always say this, like, don't get up in people's personal space. We all have a different personal space bubble. It can depend on, you know, how we were raised, how we grew up. I think my personal space bubble is actually a little bit bigger than it used to be pre-COVID. So keep that in mind. If someone takes a step back from you when you're in a conversation, respect the space. Don't move closer. Okay. Stay calm, right? Have a calm demeanor. We don't want to get all worked up, all flustered and frustrated. Try to stay calm and seek to understand the problem, right? Don't jump to conclusions. Don't make assumptions that you know what someone wants or needs. Really seek to understand and ask questions and listen. Don't dismiss them, right? This is where we talk about validating. Just because something is not your experience doesn't mean it's not valid for them. Try to be empathetic and truly be proactive at this stage. If we're noticing these early warning signs, check in, right? Check in, tap someone on the shoulder and figure out what's going on. So I'm just reading Jane's comment in the chat here. Yeah, people not being able to wait. Yeah, waiting is a huge trigger for a lot of people. They feel like, you know, if they're being asked to wait or service isn't timely, that's a sign of disrespect. I get it. Like we can't tell them not to come shopping, but we can do our best to, like, you know, appreciate that they might just need a thank you for your patience kind of comment. Okay, if someone becomes hostile, what it looks like. So now we're seeing the raised voice, maybe the face is reddening, rapid breathing, cursing, maybe their tone of voice is changing and maybe some name calling. This is where, again, we're going to maintain a safe distance. We're going to alert another coworker or manager, let someone know that, like, we might have a situation. We're going to continue to try and de-escalate, but we may need some intervention. Be aware of your means of egress. We always want to know how we're going to remove ourselves from a situation. And when we look at workplace violence, you do sort of your workplace violence risk assessment, you want to pay particular attention to those spaces where there's only one means of egress, and someone that is upset, hostile, or violent could prevent you from being able to leave. It's how we set ourselves up even in boardrooms or office spaces. If you're in HR and you're doing a discipline or maybe a termination, always make sure that you are between that individual and the door so that they can't block you in. I love this tip to allow for silence. You know, I think sometimes we're raised to think that, like, silence is awkward, and if there's a pause in conversation that we need to fill it with our voice, we don't, right? If there is that pause and if there is that silence, allow for that. That means someone is thinking and processing. If we keep bombarding them and talking, it can be very frustrating, right? So allow for that silence. Let them lead the conversation. Don't rush them. Be patient in your listening. This last one, like, again, kind of a proceed with caution. So we don't want to move an agitated individual to an area where it would isolate us, like as an employee with them. However, I do sometimes feel like people like an audience. And if they were sort of a little bit more isolated and away from maybe a lot of stressors, or there's a lot of noises and things going on in the environment, then maybe moving them to a quiet space can be helpful. But yeah, again, make sure you're not isolated with that individual and you still have access to help for other coworkers and colleagues. But yeah, I do find I have actually witnessed situations where I think people are like, oh, so like minor hockey games. There are some parents that are incredibly rude and disrespectful and inappropriate in their comments, and they're yelling, and it is attention seeking. I fully believe that. I believe that they are trying to, like, I don't know, cause a ruckus and get people to look at them, and I don't know why, because it's not really, great behavior that you want to show others. But I do think it's because they want attention. So sometimes if that's why someone might have these escalated behaviors, then, getting them away and not having that audience can be really helpful. You're right, Becca. I'm more familiar with minor hockey because my kids play hockey, but I am sure it's no different in soccer and lacrosse and volleyball, football, all of those sports. I agree. I don't know what's going on with parents sometimes. Let's not be those people, okay? Like, let's all just like put our hands in, make a pact that like we're not going to yell at refs. We're not going to start fights in the bleachers, whatever that looks like. We don't want to be those people. Okay. Threatening behaviors. So when someone, I almost refer to this as like imminent physical aggression, right? This is when we have individuals that maybe, have the clenched fist. We're seeing a lot of those physiological changes like red in the face. They might be threatening violence. And if they do, we believe them. We want assistance. We need to get people to come and help us. If we can, we're going to remove ourselves from the situation and get away. We do not initiate physical contact. And if possible, we continue to communicate. So this can be a very scary stage, right? When you feel like someone has no control over their emotional response and their behaviors, and that they will do almost anything to try and get what they want or need, or because of the reaction that they're having, it can be incredibly scary and stressful. So we do need help. We need to know what are those means of summoning assistance that are available to us. How do we maintain that distance, remove ourselves from the situation? And we're going to talk about this staff response and getting assistance in a little bit, because I have been to a lot of workplaces where I go and I'll help them complete their workplace violence risk assessment. And I often am told, oh yeah, like we have these panic alarms or panic buttons, or if we pick up this phone and push this button, people will come. And I often, unless I know, like I don't want to immediately call the police because that's not a good use of resources, but if it's supposed to be an internal response, I will push the button. I will push that panic button, or I will push that button on the phone, because about 50% of the time, the response that that person thinks they're going to get does not happen. So either the device doesn't work, right? It hasn't been properly maintained. It just doesn't call anywhere or do anything. Maybe the batteries are dead, or if it's a wiring issue, sometimes it just doesn't do anything. Other times they push the button thinking all of these people are going to come to their rescue, and nobody shows up because we haven't really trained and communicated who's responsible to respond. What does that look like? What are they supposed to do when they do respond? Right? Like, it's not helpful to have these great programs and processes and invest in tools like panic alarms and buttons, and if nobody knows what to do when they're pushed. So that is something that, you really do need to consider and practice and do some mock scenarios just to make sure that everybody knows their role. Okay. Now, the last stage is assaultive, and it's not in the scope of this safety connection, obviously, to teach you how to physically protect yourself or get out of a wrist grab and things like that. if your workplace, if you do your workplace violence risk assessment for your organization, and it is determined that maybe certain departments or certain areas are at an increased risk for physical violence, then you may want to consider a crisis intervention that has that physical component. I think in the email that you'll get after the session, we do actually have a link. I'm pretty familiar with Safe Management Group, who runs out of Ontario and is approved by the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care and to do physical intervention techniques. But otherwise, you can defend yourself with as much force as necessary to keep you and others safe. So we absolutely never suggest that a worker initiates physical contact. Because if you go and put your hands on someone that's already agitated, right, that can be perceived as very threatening. And someone's fight, flight, freeze response might go immediately to fight because you're touching them, you're putting your hands on them. They perceive that as a threat and things escalate from there. So again, we're not, even if you think it's well-intended, when someone's really agitated, even putting your hand on their shoulder can cause them to kind of become frightened, and it might not have a positive response. So let's talk quickly about what the Occupational Health and Safety Act requires. And I don't want to spend too much time on legislation, but under, under Section 32 of the Occupational Health and Safety Act, there are requirements for the employer around violence and harassment. You have to do a workplace violence risk assessment. Many workplaces kind of don't realize this or don't have one that's completed, but your risk assessment really is intended to look at the physical layout of your organization and go through sort of what are the hazards. So how often is a great question. So it should be reviewed. It doesn't have to be updated necessarily if nothing has changed, but it should be reviewed annually by your Joint Health and Safety Committee if you have one. If not, it should be updated whenever there are changes to your workplace. So if you've added an addition, or you've changed where people park, or if you've changed the type of work that you do, let's say you used to only work in like a physical location, and now you have people that are working hybrid and virtually, or maybe they're traveling out into the community and going to different areas within the community, or how they get there has changed, then you need to update your risk assessment, right? Because those all impact workplace violence and harassment. You need to have a policy. So you can do one policy that covers both workplace violence and harassment. Some workplaces do separate policies because under the legislation, they are kind of two very distinct sections. Workplace violence is one and workplace harassment is another, but your policy can include both. That's fine as long as you have something that speaks to both violence and harassment. And then you have to have a program in place. Now, for your program for violence, there are some very specific criteria around making sure that you have a means of summoning assistance, that people are trained, that people are aware of the workplace violence hazards and how to keep themselves safe. With regards to harassment, there are other requirements around doing investigations, keeping things private and confidential whenever possible, that you have to provide the outcome and the results of an investigation to the individual that made the complaint as well as the alleged harasser. So there are some very specific requirements. I would suggest, we have some resources. So again, we'll provide those to you with some sample policies and things like that. But yeah, it's really important that you go through and just make sure that your program is comprehensive enough, not just to meet the legislation, but that it's also working for the individuals that are relying on it, right? You don't want it to just be a piece of paper that's tucked into a desk somewhere or a file on a computer that nobody really updates and reads. If workplace violence is a high-risk hazard for your workplace, which I'm going to guess that because you're at this session today, this is a hazard that you've identified. Really take the time to create a program that is comprehensive, and it should be reviewed by your Joint Health and Safety Committee. Laura, yes, we do have some policies and programs, absolutely. So there's a few, I'm not plugging, there's some free resources on our website. We have a workplace violence and harassment toolkit that has, a sample risk assessment, policies, procedures. We also have a really great new offering, and it's a building block. So if you are going through your workplace policies and things like that. Maybe you're looking for, an investigating or reporting incidents. We definitely also have workplace violence and harassment as a building block. And what that means is that I don't know the cost, so I'd have to get someone else from WSPS because I'm not an account manager, but it's quite inexpensive. Where a consultant like myself or someone else would actually help develop your program so that it makes sense for you based on our templates, and then it's yours, you get it. So again, you get some consulting service at time to make sure that it's meeting the needs, you're meeting all the requirements of the legislation, and then you have your policy and program to take away. So there's building blocks for all different topics in the workplace, but I know there is also one for workplace violence and harassment. So hopefully that answers your question, Laura. But yes, I can also, link you with some free resources. Okay. All right. So in the chat, let's just get some ideas going here. So instead of saying words like relax or calm down, because in the history of people being upset, never did telling someone that was agitated to relax or calm down actually cause them to relax or calm down. So what else could we say? What would be an appropriate response instead of telling someone to relax or to calm down? Ah, yes, I like these. I hear you. I love that. Help me understand what happened. I'm here to help. These are really, really good. I'm listening. Yeah. So what happens when we tell someone to relax or calm down is we are immediately minimizing their experience. We are saying that what you are feeling is not valid, right? We are saying that, like, relax. When we tell someone to relax, we're saying that you have no right to be upset. So you need to relax. And yes, of course, we want them to relax and we want them to calm down so that we can have a conversation. But just telling someone to do that, it doesn't validate an experience and it minimizes. Yeah. Okay, so lots of good things. How can I help? What's wrong? We're trying to understand. I love that. It's okay to feel this way. Let's work through it together. Let's pause. Yes, absolutely. And you know what? Like, because in reality, when someone is upset or agitated, it may be for a very valid reason, right? It's interesting because there's a lot of workplaces, and maybe give me a thumbs up if your workplace is one of these. And I'm not going to say good or bad, but we're going to talk about it a little bit. That you have those signs, like if you have a reception area or you're doing sort of public service or social service and you have one of those signs that says 0 tolerance for violence and, aggression or hostility towards staff. Who has one of those at their workplace? Give me a thumb up. Okay. I do kind of wish that I could take someone off mute and talk about this, like if it's effective. I want to know, like, if you have those, do you find that they minimize people's hostility because you have a sign that's posted maybe by that reception area or when they walk into the building? Yeah, I see some claps. You work in a custody facility. Okay, no, it's not effective. Yeah, because like how often when someone's upset or agitated that they're going to look at a sign and say, hey, I need to check myself. Yeah, see, I'm actually with Michelle there. I think the time that it becomes effective is not as a proactive, like, oh, we have a sign, so nobody's going to be hostile or aggressive towards us. But it does give you something to point at and say, hey, this is not part of my job to be on the receiving end of verbal abuse, and we can ask you to leave based on our policy, right? I think it's an indication and it might give you sort of something to point at and say, hey, like this needs to stop. Oh yeah, that's true too, Cheryl. If it's in English or French, absolutely. Language barriers. Yes, absolutely. Or some people just English is a second language and there's communication challenges there. Absolutely. Yeah, it's really interesting. So I'm not saying take your signs down. Okay, let's be clear on that. But I'm saying we can't just have that as a control and expect that because we have a sign that we have reduced the risk of hostility, violence towards staff. So we're going to move on a little bit to this psychological health and safety conversation, and then we're going to tie them together because I think it's very interesting when we start to think about creating safe workplaces and minimizing the risk for violence and hostility, is we need to create psychological safety. And psychological safety is not having a wellness program or having an employee and family assistance program. Okay, I really want to change people's opinions on this. What it means is that we are careful to avoid mental injury for workers. So it's a state in which workers are free from exposure to reasonably foreseeable significant risks to their mental health arising from the acts and omissions of other people in the workplace so that there's a low risk of mental injury. In Canada, we have a CSA standard. It's called CSA Z1003, Psychological Health and Safety in the Workplace. And what this standard does is kind of create a guideline or a guidebook for what psychological health and safety can look like. I'm going to give you an example. Okay, so I used to work in automotive manufacturing, and we made huge GM truck frames. So really, really big, right? Big parts, big pieces and that were coming through. And our cycle time was 37 seconds, which means that we had an operator load a part into the equipment every 37 seconds. And we had a frame coming off the line. So let's just say, sort of hypothetically, that we had a 50-pound side rail. Okay, so this big side rail for this truck frame, and it was 50 pounds. And that operator had to lift it, take 3 steps, load it into the tooling, okay, every 37 seconds. So again, 50 pounds every 37 seconds. Step out and do it all over again for their 8-hour shift. You can imagine what started happening, right? Like that was very physically demanding. People were getting injured, back, neck, shoulder, wrist. We were seeing significant physical injuries because that was a very physically demanding job. As a responsible employer, we didn't say, hey, workers, you need to go and get more physically resilient, go work out, go to the gym, get stronger so that you can come and do this work without getting hurt. Instead, we said, hey, let's do something different. Let's change the work environment, change the way that people interact with this work and with this equipment so that it reduces the risk of harm. So we get a lift assist, right? Or maybe some rollers to roll the part so they didn't have to carry it. We change the way that people work so that they reduce the risk of physical injury. What happens right now in a lot of workplaces is we recognize that there are all these things going on that can negatively impact people's mental health at work, right? And we say, oh, hey, you're experiencing burnout or high levels of stress or distress. Here's your employee and family assistance program, or go off on a stress leave or burnout leave, and then come back when you're better. But they come back to the exact same environment that caused them harm in the first place, right? Because we haven't really identified what are the hazards, what is negatively impacting, what are the things about how work is organized and how people are managed here that is leading to distress and burnout. So when we think about psychological health and safety, it really does have to be proactive. It has to be, how can we minimize, how can we control, how can we create environments that reduce that risk of harm? And then making the connection between that and workplace violence and harassment. So we talk about the people that you support or your customers, your clients, your patients struggling with the normal stresses of life and leaving them in a constant state of alertness. But that exists for staff too, right? Like we are people, we are those customers, those patients. We also are often kind of up to here with our level of stress. And we might be in that fight, flight, freeze response. Like, let's just say that you have had a day where, you know, I'll give you an example. And we almost refer to it as like trigger stacking. But let's say I wake up in the morning to the sound of my dog dry heaving or throwing up on the bed. And I'm sorry, that's graphic, but it is an awful way to wake up. So we've got that. And then, you know, I go outside and my car won't start. Right? And then I get cut off on the way to work. And then I stop at Tim Hortons and they put sugar in my coffee, which I didn't ask for and don't like. So all of these things just keep happening throughout the day. And then it can be one person or one interaction, and I no longer am able to respond effectively and I react out of frustration. And unfortunately for that poor person, maybe it is an employee or a worker somewhere or someone that, you know, really didn't deserve my wrath. because I've lost emotional control because of all of these things that have happened. These exist for people too. Like, we are all people, and it's not just those that we serve and support that might be the concern, the problem. It's all of us, right? Like, we all have those days. So when we're struggling to cope with some of those stressors of life, whether it's financial stress, relationship stress, all of those things we mentioned at the beginning, it also limits our ability to respond effectively. And we all have this sort of fight, flight, freeze response. And we're going to touch on that in a minute. So maybe I'll just save that. But if we can create a psychologically safe environment, it becomes less threatening. It allows us to respond. We have supports in place. We're proactive in sort of, how we're recognizing and rewarding good work, that people feel valued and appreciated and supported and engaged. All of those things can really be helpful. That it's safe to report incidents. It's safe to ask for help. It's safe to put our hand up some days and say, I'm not okay. I'm struggling. I need help, or I need support, right? We need to create environments that allow for that. So psychologically unsafe workplaces can increase the risk and severity of workplace violence and harassment because sometimes we normalize toxic behaviors. And what I mean by that is, if people are not held accountable for inappropriate, poor behaviors, and we normalize that, it gives everybody else a pass, right, to be on the receiving end of that. There's often a lack of trust and respect. Sometimes a power imbalance can ensue where certain people feel protected and safe, and maybe it's because they've been at that organization for 30 years so that they can get away with anything because they have so much power and information and knowledge that they feel like they are very protected, right? If you have people in your workplace that you have to tiptoe around, if someone says, oh my goodness, like, I would avoid talking to Joe today because I don't think is having a great day. I'm not sure what's going on, but like, just be careful, like maybe avoid Joe. Really? Like, it's our responsibility to tiptoe around people with abusive or hostile behaviors instead of them getting held accountable. I kind of struggle with that. If there is a lack of job security in your workplace, this can lead to incredibly toxic work environments because things become competitive. They're not taking personal accountability. They're blaming others because they want to try and protect their job or show why they're valuable, and shouldn't be the first to kind of go if there's layoffs, cutbacks. And then we already talked about this lack of safe reporting mechanisms. So I'm going to insert here a bit of a trauma-informed approach to workplace violence and harassment, because I do believe in this session is geared towards sort of that social service, working with individuals that in likelihood have had some past traumas. And we may all have had past traumas, right? Depending on what your life experiences are. And when you're attempting to de-escalate individuals, they might have a trauma response to a situation where, again, they might perceive something as a threat, or their response and how they're acting might seem disproportionate to the threat. And that's often stems from some past trauma that they are reliving and sort of are going, might be triggered by when different experiences happen. This fight, flight, freeze response, and I know we've heard so much about, but it is largely automatic and instinctual, and sometimes we don't have control over it. I think we could all think of times when we have acted or behaved in ways that we were not proud of after, and we lost our cool. Don't know why I did that. That was embarrassing. I should not have said that. I should not have done that. But it's because our fight, flight, freeze response kicks in. And again, we're not responding with control. We are reacting because of this perceived threat. So maybe a quick question. I like to use this as an example when we talk about sort of our stressors and our perceived response to stressors. So maybe give me a thumbs up if you love roller coasters, like the higher, the faster, the bigger, the steeper, and then give me a thumbs down. Is that an option, a thumbs down? Give me a thumbs down if you were like, oh no, it's not, but give me the oh symbol, like the oh boy, no, If you hate roller coasters and you're like, hard pass, you're not getting me on that thing. It's not happening. Okay, I feel like we're pretty 50-50 here. This is perfect. Okay, Desmond, you are like, absolutely no, not going on the roller coaster. Okay, I love this. So we've got about 50-50 here. The stressor is the same, right? The roller coaster doesn't change for any of us, but our reaction and our response to that perceived threat is very different. So if someone like Desmond, who absolutely does not like roller coasters, right, does not want to go on it, you probably can't drag him onto the Leviathan at Canada's Wonderland. He would start getting maybe clammy palms, maybe a headache, his head starts pounding, he's got butterflies and gastrointestinal things start happening, his heart's pounding, right? He feels like he's going to be nauseous. That might be Desmond's fight, flight, freeze response. His body is telling him, do not do this, abort, this is not safe. And then maybe someone like Helena, I'm assuming you're like A-OK symbol there means you're okay with these roller coasters, like you'll go, it's fine. If you have someone that loves them and has only had positive experiences on roller coasters, loves the adrenaline rush, sits at the front, like make it the best, most exciting as possible, doesn't have any of those physiological responses, or maybe still get some butterflies because it's exciting, but absolutely feels comfortable and excited. We shouldn't judge people on their response to a perceived threat. And what I mean, oh boy, thanks, Robert. I'll get dizzy here. We shouldn't judge Desmond that he doesn't like roller coasters. Like, I get it. The thought of sitting on a little piece of metal strapped and flying through the air and going upside down and over water in this case like that, I understand why my body would say, hey, that's not safe. Don't do that. I also understand why people love them. Maybe they grew up in an environment or they went to Canada's Wonderland or on roller coasters all the time, only had good experiences. Their parents loved roller coasters and never told them they should be scared of them. Then of course that's going to feel easy and safe. But we shouldn't judge. And it's the exact same when we have this sort of trauma-informed approach, is that we need to minimize the judgment. We don't know people's life history. We don't know why something might be very upsetting that isn't upsetting to you, right? And maybe they need a little bit more support and understanding or to work through this. I think sometimes, we overuse the term trauma. Or like if, my daughter, if she's got a pimple, she'd be like, oh my God, it's so traumatic. I can't go to school today. That's not what we're talking about, right? We're talking about a deeply distressing or disturbing experience or event that overwhelms an individual's ability to cope, okay, resulting in lasting impact on their mental, emotional, and sometimes physical well-being. And when you are in that social services settlement agency space, like, can't even comprehend probably what a lot of these individuals have experienced. And I'm sure there's people on the call today that have also experienced significant traumas. And it's not up to us to judge and say that you shouldn't feel or respond or react in a way when you relive that trauma, right? It's like a reoccurring injury that can continue to happen over someone's lifetime. So a trigger is truly situations that increase the likelihood of that re-traumatization, okay? It's not just something that's annoying or unpleasant, right? It really is situations that can increase the likelihood of re-traumatizations. I think about this in sort of a similar vein as physical injuries. So you may have a back injury that's kind of lingering and maybe, good days, bad days, and then you do something that really tweaks it, right? And re-aggravates that injury. It's kind of similar. If we're looking like internally at work teams and work environments and situations, having a psychologically safe interactions workshop, and this is available for free on Workplace Strategies for Mental Health website. But essentially what this workshop does amongst a team that work closely together is to say, hey, like, what situations do you avoid or are unpleasant or cause this fight, flight, freeze response? And how can we change sort of that interaction or that experience? I'll give you another example. When I worked in healthcare, I used to do health and safety, but a good friend of mine did the WSIB claims management. And she grew up in a home where there was a lot of yelling. Her parents yelled at each other. They yelled at her and her brother. And like, she built sort of this coping mechanism to like hide in her room, put a pillow over her head, and that was how she coped with that yelling, because as a child, like that was very traumatic, and she has that sort of stamped on her throughout her adulthood. So if she was doing work and someone was upset that a claim had been denied, they started yelling at her, she literally shut down. Like she couldn't formulate a sentence because her fight, flight, freeze response said, hey, no, flight or freeze, like get out of the situation, don't deal with this, don't want to be yelled at. Like that relived like some past experiences. So it is important that we know about, we don't have to know everybody's past trauma, especially if they're not comfortable sharing, but we need to understand that if someone does react or respond disproportionately to what we perceive the threat to be, it could be because there are other things going on that we might not know or understand. And don't judge. Right? Be aware of our own attitudes and biases. So just because someone is responding in a way that is not how we would respond, it doesn't make us morally superior. Because we have coping mechanisms for certain situations, because we feel safe in certain environments when certain things happen, does not mean that we're morally superior because someone else doesn't or hasn't learned or developed those skills. Okay? It is not a pass. Like that's what's important too. It's not a pass for inappropriate behaviors, but we do need to approach it with a lens of understanding. So a trauma-informed approach to de-escalation, we want to create a sense of safety. So we want to, we need to understand that people may not always be in control of their actions. And I'm going to use, I don't know if anybody's heard of Dr. Dan Siegel, and I put a link, and I don't know if you can click on it, but it will be included in the resources that we send after the session. But essentially what it means is like using Dan Siegel's analogy is like we have our primitive brain, right down here, which is our primitive sort of emotions. And then we have our cortex, which covers our primitive brain, right? And helps us with emotional regulation, with control, with decision making. And sometimes when we have certain stressors, it sort of peels away at these protective mechanisms that are covering our primitive brain. And when someone flips their lid, what that means is now we are interacting with someone that doesn't have these protective factors, that has rational ability, is able to make decisions, look at the positive and negative of acting or responding in a certain way. So we may be interacting with individuals who it's just their primitive brain, which is that sort of fight, flight, freeze response. Right? So once we start thinking about it that way, that maybe it's not a control, maybe they flip to their lid and we're interacting and dealing with someone that has lost some of these rational components to protect and manage their emotions. So what we want to do is low and slow, right? Oh, very unlike how I'm talking to you today, which is like fast and excited and high pitched. We need to take a breath. And we need to slow our cadence. We need to talk with a lower tone of voice, right? So that we're bringing that low and slow energy and not, again, creating a sense that things are flustered and high energy, and really like lower the temperature. We want to give people a sense of control. So often when people are in that sort of fight, flight, freeze response, they feel like they've lost control of a situation or things are happening to them. So if there are some, minor choices even that we could give someone, let's say, you have someone that's frustrated around the wait time. Maybe an option is, let's reschedule. If you can't wait for the next 15 minutes, let's reschedule or find another time. Would you like to, if it's at a restaurant or something, would you like to sit at the bar while you wait? Or do you want to stay out here in the lobby, or you get a pager or something like that? Giving people even very minor choices. I think about this a lot when I did this de-escalation courses for nurses in healthcare settings, because they'd often say, yeah, but patients, they don't have a lot of control. Right? They're sitting in a bed, they're confined to a bed often. I'm like, I know, but like you could ask them, like, do you want to sit up a little bit, or do you want an extra pillow? Would you like to take your meds now or after your shower? Would like, what would you like for lunch, or would you like a snack or some water? I know that seems minor, but to a person that feels like they've lost control or have very little control over their life, that can make a huge difference. It shows that you care. It shows that you can appreciate that just being told what's happening all the time can be incredibly stressful. So again, think of small choices that you can offer. I do this with my kids too. I might already know what's for dinner, but I can say, oh, would you like Parmesan cheese on your spaghetti, or would you like your spaghetti with no cheese? It makes them feel like they have some control and influence over what they're going to eat, and they're more likely to eat it, right? I know that's not the same as what you deal with at work. I'm not suggesting that it is. I'm minimizing that a little bit. But those little minor choices really do make a big difference. And regulate over educate. When someone is in that state of high agitation, high stress, instead of educating, which means we're telling them what they're doing wrong, why things are happening, we try to regulate their behavior, right? And we can have them come in like take a seat. Do they want a glass of water, right? Let's talk through it. That would be a regulate over educate, seeking to understand. So post-incident response, understand that there are potential psychological and emotional impacts for all of those involved. Again, when people become agitated, when they yell, when they threaten, or heaven forbid they are physically violent towards staff, that is incredibly scary and threatening. And we really do need to be considerate of how we respond. So there should always be sort of this two-phase response where initially it's not about rehashing all the things that happen. It's about asking someone, how can I support you? What do you need right now? Right? And giving people maybe a few minutes to sort of come to terms with what happened. If we start immediately debriefing and going into a fact-finding mission, sometimes people feel threatened by that, right? And they feel like it's a blame game, all of those things. I understand we have to do an investigation when there are these incidents, but it should be done with in a no blame culture, really seeking to understand. It doesn't matter the who, it's what happened, what contributed, and how can we do something different next time? Okay. All right. Normalizing this help-seeking behavior is really helpful. Creating an environment where it's safe to ask for help and ask questions is so critical. And I can tell you, like, I have worked in healthcare, and, one thing that I came to learn very quickly is when you have a more junior nurse and a senior nurse that is maybe, who they've been paired up with to kind of mentor and coach and all of those things, if that more senior nurse provides an environment where it is comfortable to ask questions and they're not made to feel less than or like they should already know it or like they're being, a problem or wasting their time, that more junior nurse feels more psychologically safe and is less likely to make mistakes because it is an environment where it is okay to ask for help, where it is okay to ask questions. If that nurse, and I'm not picking on nurses for a reason, it was just like a striking example when I worked in healthcare. If that nurse is patient and understanding and says, come to me for anything, I would rather you ask me something 5 times than make a mistake that could impact patient safety or your safety, right? Then that more junior nurse feels well supported, is not constantly in that fight, flight, freeze response where they're so worried about messing up or asking questions because that's an incredibly stressful way to work. So this help-seeking behavior, we want to encourage that for all of our staff to ask questions and ask for help, but we have to create an environment where it is safe to do that. Because if we tell people to ask questions and ask for help, but every time they do, they feel judged and belittled and, less than, or like they should already know, well, we can't continue to ask people to ask for help if that's the environment that we're creating. So that is something to consider, because if someone is in a situation where maybe they're not having a great day, maybe they're struggling to cope. Maybe they, just don't feel like they're going to respond effectively to a customer, client, patient, someone you support that's really struggling. And they have someone they can tap on the shoulder and say, can you support me with this? I'm having a tough day and I don't know how I'm going to respond. Then that's best for everybody, right? That creates this sense of safety. All right, so we're going to move on to some additional tools and resources. And I know I've got Bill also joining on the call today that has some resources that he would like to put into the chat. So we do have this workplace violence and harassment toolbox. We do have a session it's a half-day session on workplace violence, situational awareness and de-escalation training. We have a mental harm prevention roadmap, which is amazing if you're looking to start your psychological health and safety journey. We also have, there's some workplace strategies for mental health. Again, all free resources on that website. They are so good. They're in line with that CSA standard for psychological health and safety in the workplace that I mentioned earlier. They have some resources on managing trauma at work. Then I've also included some information and the link to Dr. Dan Siegel's work. And then the Canadian Mental Health Association has some good resources as well and different supports. So I don't see Bill chiming in here with, he had some additional resources. If you can hang, oh, there, thank you. Okay. So WSPS, so where we work, Workplace Safety and Prevention Services, launched a Train the Trainer project. So some free health and safety training for social services organizations. So again, if that is the sector that you belong to, and I know we had a cross section of all different sectors here today, but if you are in that social services space, then we can deliver and you deliver safety training to newcomers. There are different resources that are available in 11 different languages, which is great because we know that that's always a struggle, right? Is to find information in languages that is going to actually be helpful. So again, reach out. I think Bill has included at the bottom there his email address. So we are looking for a few new partners. If this is something that you're interested in, then please reach out to Bill and see if there's something that we can help with or if there's resources that may be of assistance to you. So again, that really is geared towards any of you that are in that social services sector, settlement agencies, things like that, that are helping to train new workers to Ontario and are looking for some options as far as like if there's language barriers and things like that. Okay, thanks, Bill. So the next slide here is just how WSPS can help. There are a lot of options and resources, to be quite honest. There are free resources on our website. Right now, I'm going to throw my email address in the chat as well, because what I don't want any of you to do is start creating stuff from scratch. So if you're looking for a policy template or anything like that, reach out first. And if we have something free that we can help you with, we will absolutely send that to you. There's other free resources, again, like all of these safety connections. I'll put a link in the chat too, or maybe Emily can help me with that. I don't know, I'll have to find it quick if you give me a second and hang around for a minute. There is also some stuff around complementary consulting. There are things that we can do. We can come and take a look at your workplace and do a quick assessment of, if there are any sort of gaps in legislative compliance. Some of our account managers do go out and do a free sort of quick scan and can provide some resources to help you achieve compliance. I know now as well, there is also an initiative with the Ministry of Labour, Immigration, Training and Skills Development. If any organizations do receive orders from the ministry and are looking for some support on how to comply, there are some options for some free consulting services. So if it is related to workplace violence and harassment and you get an order from the ministry, someone like myself or another specialist in this space can come in and either help you do a risk assessment or help you with your policy and program. So again, a few different things available. We have lots of training and different sort of certifications. We do joint health and safety committee training, things like that. And then we are also a provider for the WSIB Health and Excellence Program. So that program, if you're unfamiliar, is an initiative by WSIB to help employers that commit to developing their safety programs get an enhanced or additional rebate on their WSIB premiums. So again, lots of stuff available. Don't hesitate to reach out. Again, if you're in that social services space, reach out to Bill. If you're looking for some workplace violence and harassment resources and supports, feel free to reach out to me. And then let's have some time for questions. I don't know if anybody wants to chime in the chat. If you have any questions, I can certainly stick around. We've got 15 minutes left, so I'm happy to stick around and answer any questions that you might have. I also understand that, things are busy, and if you need to jump off, that's fine too. But before you go, I just want to thank you all for your attention and engagement and showing up today to participate in this. I hope you had a few takeaways that you find helpful. Yeah, and have a great Monday. Right? Yeah, have a great week. I hope it's awesome for all of you. And I do want to just chime in with someone said you don't know what someone's going through, so be kind. And I try to think about that sometimes too when people honk at me or whatever. It's like I don't know what they're going through, right? People are having a day. That's okay.